Welcome back to Squawk Box this morning. More than 30 states' attorney general are expected to announce an antitrust investigation into Google later today. Joining us now with what to expect is Michael Fertik. He's the founding and managing partner at Heroic Ventures. Also, Chris Kelly, Facebook's former chief privacy officer and first general counsel. Our guest host this morning is Larry Bossidy. Michael, it's always great to see you. You kept the beard, but not like the beard that we saw earlier. I don't know if you saw that beard.
It was a different beard. This is about 3 days of facial hair growth for me.
But what do you expect these states' attorney generals to do, and how do you see it playing itself out?
Well, it's a very serious moment. Attorney General Paxton of Texas is very serious. He's a Tea Party Republican. This is not an attack from the left. And there are attorneys general from the left and from the right who seem to be very interested in what Google is doing and in going further, perhaps, than the U.S. federal government. The Justice Department has been going in its probe, perhaps as far as Europe has been going in its very strident activities against Google in the antitrust type activity that they've been investigating for a while. I think this is a time for Google to be worried. Look, so the main thing for sort of Mr. and Mrs. America out there to know about antitrust is that the law in this area is governed by three statutes, basically, one from 1890, and the others from, I think, 1914. So they're quite old, over 100 years old. And, of course, case law that has followed since then. But the tests that the U.S. courts have generally applied until very recently, and this is the key switch in time that may make the difference for Google, the tests have generally been asking the question, is such and such arrangement, alleged monopoly, good or bad for consumers? Typically, is it good or bad for the prices that consumers have to pay? And in the last few years, some very serious people, including academics, but also including the regulators, have been talking about antitrust in a different language, much more stridently, much more strongly on the topic of whether behavior by a very powerful, very large company can be anti-competitive just by nature, perhaps by contract, but by nature, and therefore suppress innovation and suppress the growth of small companies that they either kill or buy. And in this digital age, when you don't need capital expenditure, you don't need rails in the railroad, right. You don't need physical brick and mortar businesses. You just need a global reach with one computer, one server. The large companies have a quicker reach and a faster reach. So this different analysis may actually be carry a big price tag for companies like Google.
Chris, what do you think that price tag is?
It's not clear exactly what it would be from a price tag perspective, but I agree there's been this shift in the discussion, focusing primarily on just bigness and ability to have quickness to market. We're in the early days, though, of a world that looks like that, and obviously there are a variety of industries and media and other places that are being disrupted in a really major way. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can kind of take a Sharpie to antitrust law and write that in automatically. It's a hard row to hoe, and so I think that there's going to be some real challenges for state AGs and for federal enforcers here.
Larry, what do you think is going to happen here?
To some extent, I don't know. So there's precedent, and for better or worse, in our American legal system, the prosecutors are very good at using kind of a sliver of precedent to expand a new category into a new category of prosecutorial law. We can say that's a bad thing, and in some cases I would urge us to consider it a bad thing, but in some cases it's also how law, quote unquote, innovates. And there is a tradition, there is a set of precedential law that's very deep, very robust in the American antitrust legal space, in which the big company basically forces the small company to sell itself to the big company. And that pretty much bang on describes a lot of the perceived behavior here in Silicon Valley of some of these large companies. They basically copy you and then beat you into submission, or threaten they're going to copy you, then beat you into submission. And so I actually don't think it's as sort of a broad a jump. It's quite adjacent. So look, Google's deft. They're very smart. They're very technically able. They're also very politically able. So is Facebook. They've set up big lobbying shops in D.C. to, in some cases, I think, obfuscate the truth. Some cases to rally for their interests, of course. That's how they'd say it. But the state AGs are not in D.C., and they are many. There are 50 of them. And so I think this is part of the laboratory of experiments we have in this federalist system that we have, which is so clever and so ingenious the Founding Fathers gave us, that you can, in fact, not be in trouble in D.C., but possibly be in trouble down in Texas. And I can't tell you which is worse sometimes.
What were you going to say, Larry?
I was just going to say that I think this is serious. but it's somewhat the rite of passage. You saw it in the day with IBM. You saw it in the day with Microsoft. They basically ignore these things for X number of years and then decide to descend. Hopefully they have a target in terms of what they're looking for in terms of the breach of the code. But I think they'll come through this fine. There might be, in fact, some request to spin something or other off, but by and large, I think they'll come out of this fine.
And I think that's right. I think it'll probably end up with a request to spin something off, and you could actually see shareholder accretive value by sort of releasing value and unlocking value in that way, and so forth and so on. But yeah, my guess is this is just a guess, but my guess is that prognostication is right. The outcome is some fining, but probably a request to spin something off. I think that sounds just about right.
Do either of you look at? Go ahead, Chris.
If there's a good hard analysis of what the anti-competitive conduct is, the problem that I've seen in most of what's been asserted so far is that these companies are just too big and too powerful, and that's not an antitrust argument at the end of the day. That is a sort of, hey, we're worried about a variety of things. But let's talk a lot more about what are the variety of things that we're worried about instead of just too big and too powerful. It's been a really kind of inchoate thing, and it needs to be defined a lot better. And I think you've seen some of that in what we've heard from the New York AG already, and I anticipate what we'll hear today. And when you get down to it, it's where do you have some sort of bottleneck control that you exploit in an improper way to stifle competition? And if that
the allegations have been more specific than that. The allegations have been more specific than that for a while. We don't know what's coming out of the AG's office just yet, but in detail. But there is more specificity around it. The advertising platform arising from the DoubleClick acquisition in 2007, the YouTube acquisition in 2006. These things that come up a lot. The sort of the major platform control and look, a lot of these companies like to call themselves platforms, or even, dare I say, the word utility. But they want to describe themselves as utilities and get the economic upside as utilities and platforms, but may not want to take the responsibility of being a utility and platform. So, yeah, you're right. You have to look at these things under a microscope, and that's what the regulators are going to do, and that's what the people are going to do. And we shouldn't be quick to judge this in the Twitter sphere moment of American history. But I actually think the allegations have been much more specific than
can I ask both
Chris
of you,
might be suggesting.
Real quick, two related questions. One is, I don't know if you saw, there's a story in today's New York Times related to the App Store with Apple. And it really shows that over the past several years, Apple apps have dominated the search results. If you put in TV or music or something like that into the search, you get Apple, and oftentimes multiple Apple apps. Before Spotify would show up, a dozen apps down the list. Do you think that Apple is next? Do you think that your former firm, Facebook, is next?
I mean, I think that there are a lot of people looking at a lot of different pieces of conduct in this space, and I think that's for the most part a healthy thing. But we have to do it within the lens of how do consumers benefit from some of this too. The classic statement about antitrust law is that it protects competition, not competitors. And so when these companies are competing with each other, and when they're also competing with global dominant firms that operate in a number of different jurisdictions, from China especially, you have to look at it in an overall context in that way. That you can't just say, well, this company, like it's too big. I don't understand how much power it has.
And that's not what they're saying. I'm sorry, Chris. That's not what they're saying. They're not saying it's too big. I know that's what it sounds like sometimes. They're not saying it. They're not just saying it's too big. They're being much more specific about that. Adding to the list, by the way, you might examine Amazon. I'm sure you've had the experience when you search on Amazon for a product. You might see that Amazon's own sort of off-brand competitive product is one of the things that they have as Amazon's choice or as Amazon preferred listed.
I want to thank you both.
All these things are
playing
similar.
us out with the music, but we appreciate both of you getting up early on the West Coast this morning to help us through this conversation.
And good morning, guys.
You bet. Thank you.